More bad news for FIFA, more bad news for Gianni Infantino.
The FA asked for a full review of how things are run at FIFA. Clearly, this is not acceptable to them. We've also heard for the first time critically from South American football's governing body, CONMEBOL. They're normally so loyal to Gianni Infantino. Now they're talking about concern about the repeated unilateral actions taken without resorting to dialogue or to the institutional mechanisms.
For years, FIFA has managed to survive controversy, criticism, and some seriously messy battles behind closed doors. But
FIFA's plans to raise billions of pounds by seeking private investments in its competitions via a minority stake in a new commercial property.
He scrapped his controversial plan, apologised and tried to rally support. But tonight, European football bosses are having none of it. They say they still have no confidence in the FIFA president Gianni Infantino.
in the summer of 2026, the organization stepped into a fight that suddenly looked much bigger than the usual football politics. What was presented as a massive financial opportunity quickly became one of the most controversial proposals surrounding the World Cup. On the 29th of July 2026, FIFA President Gianni Infantino unveiled a plan that he presented as a potential game changer for football's financial future.
And that the boycott of the World Cup still stands. So the most powerful man in world football is still battling to survive.
We believe that the FFE proposal would unlock the sport's potential in every corner of the world across men's, women's and youth football.
According to FIFA, the move could bring in an additional $20 billion, money that could supposedly be used to develop football across the globe and increase funding for all 211 FIFA member associations. On paper, those numbers sounded huge. But once people looked closer at what FIFA was actually proposing, the mood changed fast. Strip away the corporate language, and the idea was pretty simple. FIFA was looking at ways to sell parts of the World Cup commercially, and that was where things got messy. Instead of football leaders lining up behind what FIFA presented as a new source of money, the proposal triggered serious resistance from some of the most powerful voices in the sport. The reaction wasn't subtle either.
The governing body staff were deceived by Infantino's lack of openness over his plans for the World Cup private investor scheme.
Up that pressure on Gianni Infantino, not accepting the apology issued yesterday. We talked about it being support offered. It was support just from a few members of Infantino's management board during that meeting in Morocco. So,
one of the harshest statements circulating around the controversy declared, FIFA needs to be permanently dismantled and Infantino needs to be arrested. UEFA unanimously rejected the proposal, and CONCACAF soon followed with opposition of its own. That alone would have created a major political headache for FIFA. But the situation became even more awkward when senior figures from inside FIFA reportedly began speaking publicly against their own president.
this is where we are at now. On Monday, we said the Football Association was set to submit this letter. Now they have officially withdrawn support for Gianni Infantino's re-election next year.
Suddenly, this wasn't just another argument about money. FIFA had promoted the proposal as a way of creating billions in additional revenue and spreading more resources throughout world football. Instead, it had managed to bring together organizations and officials that don't always see eye to eye. A plan meant to strengthen FIFA's financial position was now exposing just how deep the resistance to its leadership had become.
This is all about how Gianni Infantino secretly negotiated these plans to sell off shares in the World Cup to private investors before eventually putting them to members. He said he would do down the line, but these plans leaked out. They had to scramble to confirm them, and criticism from his own staff. And a third strand is we've been hearing from the players' union globally, FIFPro, who say that there's been a profound abuse of presidential power and trust is deeply shattered with FIFA, and they're demanding players now have a voice on the FIFA Council on the future of football.
For Infantino, though, the outrage surrounding this proposal seemed to miss the bigger picture. Journalists, pundits, and football fans have criticized him plenty of times before, from the way FIFA operates to the decisions made under his leadership. But this controversy hit differently, because Infantino wasn't presenting the idea as some wild money grab. From his point of view, he was looking at a massive financial opportunity that football would be crazy to ignore. On paper, the pitch was actually pretty straightforward. generate more money from football's biggest product, then push more of that cash back into the game around the world. And the timing of the proposal was no accident.
The FA are set to withdraw support for FIFA President Gianni Infantino. They are to write to Infantino to withdraw a previous letter of support for his re-election.
FIFA had just wrapped up what it described as its most commercially successful World Cup ever, which isn't exactly shocking when you consider we had 40 extra matches and that success appears to have convinced Infantino that football had reached a major turning point. The World Cup was getting bigger, commercial interest was booming, and FIFA had more ways than ever to squeeze additional revenue out of the tournament. In his eyes, if there was ever a moment to ride that wave and turn the World Cup into an even bigger financial machine, this was probably it. And this is where Infantino's argument gets more interesting. His position is that Europe is already sitting at football's richest table. The continent has the Premier League, La Liga, Bundesliga, Serie A, the Champions League, enormous broadcasting contracts, major sponsors, billionaire owners, and clubs capable of generating staggering amounts of money every season. But outside Europe's football bubble, the financial reality can look completely different. Infantino's argument is that many associations simply don't have access to anything close to those resources.
The Wales FA told Sky News last night that they were withdrawing their support. The Wales FA were the first football association to do that, and now looks the FA are going to follow suit. More on that story as we get it.
So, from FIFA's perspective, making even more money from the World Cup wasn't just about making FIFA richer. It was being sold as a way to close that financial gap. That financial gap becomes much clearer when you compare football's biggest nations with associations operating on a completely different level. England, Spain, and Germany don't exactly need FIFA money to keep the lights on. Their domestic leagues already attract huge television deals, global sponsors, wealthy investors, and millions of fans. But once you move away from those powerhouse markets, the money can dry up pretty quickly. Think about countries like Uzbekistan, DR Congo, or Cape Verde. Their football associations don't have anything close to the same commercial machine behind them. And that distinction was central to Infantino's argument. In his eyes, FIFA wasn't selling football piece by piece. It was simply finding a more aggressive way to monetize the biggest asset it controls, aka the World Cup. The logic was simple. If FIFA could squeeze billions more out of the World Cup, it could theoretically send more money toward developing nations, improve facilities, support grassroots programs, and continue growing football across all 211 member associations. Basically, take the enormous global attention surrounding the World Cup and turn more of it into cold, hard cash for the wider game. But wait, generate more revenue? Isn't FIFA a non-profit? Technically, yes. According to FIFA, the organization doesn't operate like a normal company with shareholders waiting for their cut. FIFA says every dollar it earns is ultimately reinvested back into football through tournaments, development programs, member associations, and other projects. So from Gianni Infantino's perspective, bringing in more money didn't automatically mean corporate greed. His argument was that more FIFA revenue could mean more money flowing back into football, especially in countries that need outside investment the most. And there was another important detail. Infantino wasn't publicly presenting this as some finished deal that FIFA members had to swallow. He repeatedly described the idea as a proposal rather than an obligation. The pitch was that members would discuss it, debate it, and eventually decide through FIFA's democratic process whether this new commercial direction was actually worth pursuing. At least, that was how FIFA wanted the situation to look from the outside. And this is where FIFA's carefully polished explanation started running into a serious problem. Infantino completely rejected the claim that FIFA was trying to sell off a piece of the World Cup. According to him, that wasn't what was happening at all. His argument was that FIFA would instead create a new commercial entity, one capable of bringing in outside investment and turning previously untapped opportunities into serious money. In FIFA's language, this was about, quote, unlocking value that had supposedly been sitting on the table for years. And sure, calling it unlocking value sounds a whole lot cleaner than calling it what critics believed it was. Because no matter how carefully Infantino packaged the proposal, plenty of people across football looked at the basic idea and saw something very different. To them, outside investors potentially gaining a financial stake connected to FIFA's biggest commercial asset looked dangerously close to selling part of the World Cup machine. FIFA could dress it up in boardroom language, throw around phrases about investment and growth, and explain the structure however it wanted. The football associations still weren't buying the pitch. Matter of fact, they couldn't have been much less convinced. But that's what made this whole situation so strange. Why did this particular proposal trigger such a strong reaction? FIFA controversy is hardly some new phenomenon. The organization has spent years walking straight through political disputes, protests, criticism, and public backlash surrounding its biggest tournaments. Qatar 2022 became an even bigger flashpoint, drawing criticism from human rights organizations, supporters, and some players over a range of issues surrounding the tournament. Germany's rarely doing anything but making it to the quarterfinals of a World Cup. And then came 2026. The World Cup in the United States, Canada, and Mexico arrived with political debates and controversies of its own. In other words, FIFA had been through storms before. The difference this time was that the resistance wasn't simply coming from politicians, activists, journalists, or supporters watching from the outside. This fight was beginning to come from inside football's own power structure. And that's when this stopped looking like another round of FIFA controversy and started looking like a full-blown rebellion from inside the game. This time, the loudest criticism wasn't coming from politicians, journalists, supporters, or campaign groups. It was coming from the organizations that actually help run world football. UEFA moved quickly and rejected FIFA's proposal. CONCACAF followed shortly afterward, and while working on this video, the AFC and the US Soccer Federation have rejected the proposal as well. Suddenly, FIFA wasn't dealing with a few angry voices on social media. Major football bodies across different regions were pushing back against the same idea, and that's where this story started getting seriously awkward for Infantino. Because normally, football can't agree on anything. People argue over VAR every single weekend. They argue about new tournament formats, changes to the Champions League, World Cup expansion, fixture congestion, referees, and basically every decision made by the people running the sport. We can't even agree on who the real GOAT is, which, by the way, we all know is Anthony. There's almost always another side to the argument. One group loves a change, another thinks it's destroying football, and everybody spends the next 6 months going back and forth about it. But this proposal was different. Multiple confederations were suddenly finding themselves on the same side against FIFA's plans. And seeing all of these football associations agree with one another is like watching Kevin De Bruyne score a hat-trick. It's incredibly rare, but when it happens, it's beautiful. The irony here was brutal. According to Gianni Infantino, the entire purpose of this proposal was to strengthen football around the world, bring in new investment, and ultimately create more money for FIFA's member associations. Instead, the proposal managed to accomplish something FIFA probably never intended. It gave several major football organizations a common reason to stand against FIFA. The first major confederation to publicly draw a line in the sand was UEFA. Now, FIFA and UEFA fighting with each other isn't exactly breaking news. These two organizations have been butting heads for years, whether it's over the international calendar, tournament expansion, player workload, or FIFA's expanded Club World Cup. But this confrontation carried a different weight. UEFA wasn't simply complaining about scheduling or another tournament being added to an already packed calendar. It was challenging the basic principle behind FIFA's proposal. And UEFA made its position crystal clear in an official statement, which reads, "The World Cup is not for sale. The soul and governance of football are not assets to trade." And UEFA wasn't leaving much room for FIFA to spin its way out of this one. Its statement continued, "None of us are the owners of football. It is not FIFA's to sell." Those words went straight to the heart of the controversy. UEFA wasn't simply questioning whether FIFA had designed a good business deal. It was questioning whether FIFA should even have the power to make this kind of deal in the first place. And the resistance reportedly went far beyond a strongly worded statement. Every member of UEFA's executive committee unanimously rejected the proposal. There was even discussion around the possibility of boycotting the next World Cup entirely if FIFA decided to push ahead anyway. Italy got a head start and already boycotted the last 3 World Cups. But behind all the jokes was a much more serious concern: transparency. Critics weren't only asking what FIFA wanted to do. They wanted to know exactly how the deal would work, who could invest, what those investors would receive in return, and how much influence an outside commercial entity could potentially gain. For something involving the biggest tournament in football, those weren't exactly small details. And UEFA wasn't standing alone for very long. Soon after its statement, CONCACAF released a response of its own. Representing 41 member associations across North America, Central America, and the Caribbean, the Confederation made clear that it was rejecting FIFA's proposal in its current form. CONCACAF's concerns added another layer to the growing mess. The deadline was considered too rushed, there hadn't been enough consultation with the organizations involved, and critics argued that FIFA hadn't provided enough transparency about how the whole thing would actually operate. But perhaps the biggest question was also the simplest one. Why did private investors need to be involved with the World Cup in the first place? That's a pretty important question when you're talking about FIFA's crown jewel. So, with major football bodies pushing back, how did FIFA try to win members over? Well, FIFA announced that any association approving the proposal before the 15th of December 2026 would receive an additional $20 million in development funding. And you can probably see why that raised a few eyebrows. To critics, offering millions in extra funding to associations that approved a controversial proposal before a deadline could look uncomfortably close to paying members to get on board. Sure sounds like a bribe to me, but of course, FIFA insists that this was simply an incentive to reward early participation. That distinction quickly became another major part of the fight, because the argument was no longer just about selling commercial rights. It was also about how FIFA was trying to secure the support needed to make the proposal happen. But all of that outside resistance was about to become the least comfortable part of Infantino's problem. UEFA rejecting the proposal was one thing, CONCACAF pushing back was another. FIFA has dealt with rival organizations criticizing its decisions plenty of times before. What happened next was much harder to brush aside, because the criticism was now coming from people inside FIFA's own walls. Kevin Lamore, FIFA's chief operating officer, publicly accused Gianni Infantino of deceiving FIFA's own administration over the proposal. And Lamore appeared to understand exactly how serious it was for someone in his position to speak out. He even acknowledged that publicly challenging the FIFA president could potentially cost him his job. That's not your normal disagreement over a meeting agenda or some minor policy change. When one of the organization's most senior executives is willing to put his own position on the line to challenge the president publicly, the whole situation starts looking a lot messier. And Lamore wasn't the only senior figure prepared to take that risk. Carlos Cordeiro, one of Infantino's own advisors, went even further and resigned from FIFA altogether. Explaining his decision, Cordeiro said, "I cannot stand by while FIFA considers selling a stake in the World Cup." He wasn't criticizing FIFA from the safety of the outside. He was walking away from his own position because he believed the proposal crossed a line. At that point, this could no longer be dismissed as another chapter in the never-ending FIFA versus UEFA power struggle. One of FIFA's senior executives was accusing the leadership of deceiving its own administration, while one of Infantino's advisors had decided the situation was serious enough to resign completely. That changed the entire vibe around the controversy. For years, Gianni Infantino had weathered criticism from journalists, politicians, activists, supporters, and millions of football fans. FIFA had become pretty experienced at dealing with outside pressure and continuing with business as usual. But this was different. The people raising questions weren't simply throwing rocks from outside the building anymore. Some of them were sitting inside it. And that's what made this moment so damaging. The proposal that was supposed to bring more money into global football was now creating cracks within FIFA's own leadership structure. Instead of convincing the football world that this was some clever new financial opportunity, FIFA suddenly had to explain why people close to the organization itself were publicly turning against the idea. This time, some of the loudest criticism wasn't coming from FIFA's traditional enemies, it was coming from football itself. And perhaps Don Carlo himself summed up the mood around the game better than anyone else could. And then, After days of pressure coming from almost every direction, FIFA finally backed away. What had started as an ambitious plan to supposedly unlock billions of dollars in new value had turned into an internal and external political headache that was becoming harder to control by the day. UEFA had rejected it. CONCACAF had pushed back. The AFC had joined the opposition. Senior figures within FIFA had publicly raised concerns, and even people close to Gianni Infantino were distancing themselves from the proposal. With resistance piling up, FIFA ultimately decided not to move forward with the proposed sale. Officially, FIFA presented the decision as exactly what a consultation process was supposed to look like. The organization had presented an idea, listened to feedback from its members, recognized their concerns, and decided not to proceed. From FIFA's perspective, that wasn't necessarily a defeat. It could be presented as the system working exactly as intended. Critics, however, saw something completely different. To them, this looked less like FIFA calmly listening to feedback and more like a massive U-turn from Infantino after realizing just how little support the proposal actually had. Some even interpreted the retreat as an attempt to protect his political position after opposition began spreading through football's most powerful institutions. Whatever Infantino's personal motivation was, the pressure surrounding the proposal had become impossible to ignore. And that's what makes this controversy stand apart from so many of the battles FIFA had already survived. For years, Gianni Infantino had faced criticism from politicians, journalists, campaigners, supporters, and millions of football fans. There was Qatar, the expanded Club World Cup, and most recently, the expanded World Cup itself. Each controversy created another wave of headlines and arguments, yet FIFA continued moving forward. This time though, the problem wasn't necessarily that the proposal was the biggest controversy of Infantino's presidency, it was where the resistance was coming from. These weren't simply people protesting FIFA from the outside. These were some of the organizations and officials responsible for actually running the sport. And when those people started saying no at the same time, FIFA suddenly found itself facing a kind of opposition that was much harder to dismiss. For years, football had accepted the direction of travel. Bigger tournaments, more matches, more commercial partnerships, more revenue, and an increasingly powerful FIFA machine. There were arguments along the way, of course, but the machine kept moving. This proposal appeared to hit a nerve. UEFA, CONCACAF, the AFC, senior FIFA executives, and advisors connected to Infantino were suddenly pushing back against the same plan. Organizations that regularly disagree over how football should be run had found common ground in rejecting FIFA's proposal. And perhaps that was the real significance of what happened. FIFA wanted to unlock more financial value from the World Cup. Instead, it discovered something potentially far more important. There was a limit to how far some of football's most powerful institutions were prepared to follow. For perhaps the first time in Gianni Infantino's presidency, major forces within football's governing structure weren't simply criticizing FIFA from different corners. They were presenting something much closer to a united front. And maybe that's why the 29th of July 2026 will be remembered for something much bigger than one controversial FIFA proposal. Whether Gianni Infantino remains FIFA president for another year or another decade, that date has already earned its place in football history. Not simply because FIFA explored the possibility of bringing private investment into the World Cup, but because of what happened when the rest of football finally responded. For once, the usual divisions started disappearing. Confederations that don't always agree found themselves standing on the same side. Senior FIFA figures were willing to speak publicly. Advisors were prepared to walk away, and organizations with completely different interests came together around one message. There had to be a line somewhere. Maybe that's the biggest lesson from this entire mess. Football has changed massively over the last few decades. The tournaments are bigger, the money is crazier, the calendars are packed, and almost every part of the game has become more commercial. Sometimes it can feel like the people watching from the stands or sitting at home have less and less influence over where the sport is heading. But July 29th showed that even FIFA can face serious resistance when enough of football's institutions decide they've had enough. Whatever happens next, that part of the story matters. And today, I feel hopeful. Not because every problem in football suddenly disappeared overnight, because obviously it didn't. But because this entire situation showed that there are still moments when the people running the game can draw a line and say, this is going too far. Now I want to know what you think. Was FIFA's proposal genuinely a smart way to generate billions more for developing football nations? Or did private investment in the World Cup cross a line that should never have been touched? Drop your take in the comments because I'm curious to see where you stand. And if you enjoyed this video and want more stories covering the crazy politics, money, controversies, and power struggles happening behind the scenes of the beautiful game, make sure you like the video, share it with another football fan, and subscribe to Matchio. There's always another story hiding behind what happens on the pitch, and we'll be right here breaking it down. Thanks for watching Matchio. Peace.